My name was Magos Explorator Thaddeus Kane. I say was because what I am now cannot be called by that name anymore. What I am now has no body to contain a name, no flesh to anchor identity, no death to grant mercy. I exist as screaming data in the networks of Mars, an eternal warning no one can hear, a consciousness that dissolved atom by atom and yet somehow never stopped experiencing. But to understand what I became, you must first know what I was. Let me take you back to when I still had hands to touch, eyes to see, and the foolish belief that the Omnissiah's servants were protected by their devotion to the machine god. I was 43 Terran Standard years old when I found the artifact that would become my eternal prison. 43 years of flesh, of breath, of the simple animal certainty that my consciousness resided in the 3 pounds of grey matter encased in my skull. I had been born on Mars, in the shadowed depths beneath the Tharsis Montes, where my father worked as a Lex mechanic in the archives of forbidden technologies. My earliest memory is specific and precious. I cling to it even now, though it brings agony to recall what I've lost. I was 7 years old, standing in my father's workstation, the smell of sacred oils and ozone thick in the recycled air. He'd placed his hand, organic flesh, warm and calloused, on my shoulder, and showed me a data slate containing schematics from the dark age of technology. Thaddeus, he'd said, his voice unaugmented, purely human. The ancients understood creation in ways we've forgotten. Our sacred duty is to recover what was lost, to honor the machine god by preserving the works of humanity's golden age. I'd looked up at him. My father was tall, with iron-gray hair and eyes that still held warmth despite decades of Mechanicus conditioning. But the texts say we must never innovate, only maintain, I'd replied, repeating the catechisms beaten into me by the junior tech priests who oversaw my early instruction. He'd smiled then, an expression that would one day be stripped from me along with my facial muscle. To recover is not to innovate, my son. We are archaeologists of lost truth, not heretics of new creation. Remember that distinction. It may save your soul. I didn't understand then that the Mechanicus makes no such distinction. Innovation, recovery, curiosity, all are sins against the doctrine of the Omnissiah. But my father's words planted a seed of ambition that would grow through my decades of service, pushing me higher through the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus, driving me toward Explorator fleets and forgotten worlds, ultimately delivering me to the nameless moon where the weapon waited. By the time I achieved the rank of Magos Explorator, I'd replaced 67% of my organic body with sanctified augmentation. My left arm was a multi-jointed mechadendrite terminating in precision manipulators. My eyes had been replaced with optical sensors that could perceive 17 spectra of electromagnetic radiation. My lungs were rebreather units that could process poison atmospheres. My legs were reinforced with plasteel substructure to carry the weight of my augmentations. But my brain, my precious organic brain, remained 73% original tissue, enough to maintain what I believed was my essential humanity, my consciousness, myself. I was assigned to Explorator Fleet Sigma 9, tasked with investigating archaeological sites in the Ghoul Stars region, that nightmare margin of space where reality grows thin and ancient horrors sleep in the dark between stars. The propaganda of the Mechanicus promises that those who serve the Omnissiah are blessed with divine protection that the machine god watches over those who maintain the sacred engines. I repeated those lies in my prayers every day. I performed the rite of activation each morning, anointing my augmentations with sacred oils, while chanting the litany of ignition. I believed, with the fervent desperation of the indoctrinated, that my devotion mattered, that my service had meaning, that the entity we called the Omnissiah was real and cared for its servants. I was a fool. The mission that doomed me began like dozens of others I'd undertaken across my 20-year career as an explorator. We'd detected unusual energy signatures emanating from a moon orbiting a dead world in an uncharted system. The signatures matched pre-imperial patterns, specifically emissions consistent with Dark Age of technology power sources. For the Mechanicus, such discoveries are holy grails, fragments of humanity's lost golden age, when technology bordered on the miraculous, when humans built wonders that even 10,000 years of regression and superstition cannot fully replicate. I led a team of 6 to the surface, 5 junior tech priests under my command, all male, all augmented to various degrees, all indoctrinated into the same comfortable lies I believed. Lex Mechanic Erasmus, whose brain was 40% replaced with cogitator components, making him a living calculator. Artisan Hadrian, whose hands had been replaced with 8 mechadendrites, allowing simultaneous manipulation of complex mechanisms. Savant Marcus, whose organic eyes had been supplemented with a full sensor array that made his head look like an insectoid nightmare of lenses and scanners. Brother Quintus and Brother Silas, twins who joined the Mechanicus together and been augmented with synchronized neural links, allowing them to coordinate technical tasks with inhuman precision. We descended in a Mechanicus lander, cutting through the thin atmosphere of the unnamed moon. No breathable air, just trace elements and toxic gases. Surface temperature, -47 degrees Celsius. Gravity, 0.73 standard. The moon's surface was gray, regolith, and exposed bedrock, pockmarked with impact craters from millions of years of cosmic bombardment. But our sensors had detected the signature 17 kilometers below the surface, a facility, intact, still powered after millennia of abandonment. Magos, Erasmus's voice crackled through the vox. Preliminary scans indicated the structure below predates the Age of Strife. Construction techniques and material composition are consistent with Martian archives of Dark Age colonial expansion. I felt what I can only describe as religious ecstasy, the same feeling an ecclesiarchy priest might experience upon finding a fragment of the Emperor's armor. This was why I joined the Explorator fleets, why I'd endured the decades of augmentation and the slow erosion of my humanity. To touch the works of the ancients, to recover lost knowledge, to prove my worth to the machine god I'd been conditioned to worship. "Begin excavation protocols," I commanded. "Standard archaeological procedures. Catalog everything. Disturb nothing until full scans are complete." We spent 6 days cutting through the bedrock with melters and molecular separators, descending through layers of stone toward the structure below. The smell of superheated rock filled our filtered air supplies, a sharp mineral tang like burning metal. The sound of our excavation equipment was a constant shrieking whine that would have deafened unaugmented humans. My temperature sensors registered the increasing heat as we descended, from -47 degrees on the surface to 14 degrees Celsius as we approached the facility. On the 7th day, The irony of that number does not escape me even now. We breached the outer wall. The facility was pristine, not the corroded ruin we typically discovered, not the degraded remnant barely recognizable as human construction. This was a Dark Age structure exactly as it had been sealed millennia ago, its systems still humming with power, its lights activating automatically as we entered, its environmental controls bringing the atmosphere to standard human parameters within minutes. The walls were smooth polymer composites that seemed to absorb our scanning beams. The floors were metallic, but not any metal in our archives. Analysis returned impossible results, materials that our sensors claimed shouldn't exist, atomic structures that violated our understanding of matter. The lighting came from no visible source, just a generalized luminescence that emanated from the ceiling panels, soft and white and utterly unlike the harsh industrial illumination of Imperial facilities. "This is wrong," Hadrian whispered, his vox barely audible. "Nothing survives this intact. Even sealed Dark Age facilities show degradation, entropy, decay. This is as if it was built yesterday." "The Omnissiah preserves what is sacred," I replied reflexively, repeating the doctrine I'd been taught. But even as I spoke, doubt wormed through my thoughts. The Mechanicus teaching said ancient sites endured through divine will, that the machine god protected sacred knowledge. But I'd seen hundreds of Dark Age sites, and all had shown the scars of time. This was different. This was wrong. We proceeded deeper into the facility, following corridors that branched and interconnected in patterns that hurt to map. The structure seemed larger inside than our external scans had indicated. Not impossible, but unsettling. The smell changed as we descended, on the surface levels, sterile and neutral, but deeper down, a faint odor like ozone and something else, something organic and vaguely sweet, like decay disguised as perfume. In the third sub-level, we found the laboratories, vast chambers filled with equipment I recognized from theoretical texts, but had never seen physically realized. Quantum manipulation arrays, molecular deconstruction matrices, devices whose purpose I couldn't even guess, their forms suggesting functions beyond my comprehension. And on every workstation, data cores, still powered, still accessible, still containing their original data after 10,000 years of isolation. "Magos, this is the archive of terrestrial engineering," Erasmus breathed, his augmented voice trembling with awe. "I'm reading references to projects from the Dark Age that exist only as legends in our most restricted texts. Planetary reformation, stellar manipulation, weaponry that—" He paused, his cogitator components processing data faster than his organic brain could articulate. Weaponry that the ancients themselves classified as extinction-grade threats, unsuitable for deployment under any circumstances. The twins, Quintus and Silas, had interfaced directly with a data core, their neural links allowing them to absorb information at rates impossible for organic cognition. When they spoke, it was in perfect synchronization, their voices overlapping into an eerie harmony. They built things here that they feared to use, built them and sealed them and warned themselves to forget. "What did they build?" I asked, my curiosity overwhelming the growing dread in what remained of my organic gut. Marcus answered, his sensor arrays focusing on a sealed door at the chamber's far end. "Something behind that barrier, the energy signature we detected from orbit. It's emanating from beyond that door, but Magos—" His voice carried a weight of horror. "The door is marked Old Earth language, pre-imperial script, I can translate. Proceed, I commanded, though something primal in my remaining organic neurons screamed to flee, to return to orbit, to destroy this facility from space and forget we'd ever found it. Marcus's voice was flat, emotionless, the way tech priests speak when reciting data they wish they could unfeel. Warning. Beyond this threshold is device designation, molecular dissolution, array, prototype weapon system, development terminated by unanimous vote of Terran High Council. Reason for termination, excessive suffering inflicted upon targets. Device unmakes molecular bonds at controlled rates. Targets retain full consciousness throughout dissolution. Death occurs only after complete atomic dispersal. Estimated suffering, duration, 14.3 hours for standard human mass. This weapon violates Article 17 of the Terrestrial Convention on Humane Warfare. This weapon is never to be activated. This weapon is never to be studied. This facility is to be sealed and forgotten. If you are reading this, leave now. Forget this place. Some knowledge serves only suffering. Silence filled the chamber after Marcus finished reading. Even our breathing, filtered through rebreathers and augmented lungs, seemed to stop. The humming of the facility's power systems became oppressively loud, a droning mechanical mantra that mimicked the chants we used in our daily rituals. I should have listened to the warning. The ancients who built this place, who possessed technology we worship as divine achievement, had looked upon their creation and declared it too cruel to exist. They had sealed it away and begged the future to forget. But I was a magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus, trained from childhood to believe that all knowledge is sacred, that the works of the ancients are holy, that to recover lost technology is to serve the machine god. We proceed, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my organic nervous system. This is exactly what we are meant to find. This is why the Omnissiah guided us here. The Omnissiah guided nothing. The Omnissiah does not exist. That fiction is a control mechanism, a lie to make tech priests obedient, to justify the Mechanicus's hoarding of knowledge and its suppression of innovation. But I didn't know that yet. I was still a believer, still faithful, still stupid enough to think my prayers mattered. We opened the door. The chamber beyond the sealed door was small, almost intimate, perhaps 15 meters square, with walls of the same impossible metal as the rest of the facility. In the center stood a device that even now, after all I've endured, I struggle to describe adequately. It was approximately 3 meters tall, cylindrical, composed of nested rings that rotated slowly around a central core that pulsed with sickly green light. The light didn't illuminate the chamber. Instead, it seemed to absorb illumination, creating zones of darkness that moved with the ring's rotation. The smell in that chamber was overwhelming. That same sweet decay I'd detected earlier, but concentrated, almost visible in its intensity. It made my remaining organic sinus tissue burn and my augmented olfactory senses flag warning alerts. The sound was worse. A low-frequency humming just below the threshold of human hearing, a vibration I felt in my bones and augmentations alike. A sensation like reality groaning under pressure. Magos, Hadrian said carefully, I recommend we seal this chamber and request guidance from Mars. This device is... it radiates wrongness. My machine spirit sensors are reporting errors that shouldn't be possible. Contradictory data, impossible readings. Machine spirits don't exist. They're superstitious nonsense, the Mechanicus' cargo cult misunderstanding of technological principles they can no longer fully comprehend. What Hadrian's sensors detected was probably quantum instability or exotic radiation, but we'd been trained to attribute instrumental anomalies to machine spirit displeasure, rather than consider that our sacred technology might simply be failing. The Mechanicus worships its ignorance and calls it piety. "Your sensors are blessing us with warning," I said, framing the error messages in religious terms as I'd been conditioned to do. "But the Omnissiah has led us here for a reason. We will document this device, extract its data cores, and transport it to Mars for proper study." I approached the device, my augmented legs carrying me forward, despite every survival instinct screaming retreat. Up close, the rotating rings revealed themselves to be covered in microscopic inscriptions, equations and schematics etched into the metal at scales requiring magnification to read. I extended a mechadendrite, intending merely to take surface samples. The moment my augmented limb came within 1 meter of the device's outer ring, everything changed. The rings stopped rotating. The pulsing green light flared into brilliance that overwhelmed my optical senses, flooding my visual cortex with data my brain couldn't process. The low-frequency hum spiked into a shriek that shattered my audio pickup, leaving my hearing filled with electronic screeching. And then, silence. Perfect, absolute silence. The kind of silence that shouldn't exist in a powered facility, the kind of silence that speaks of systems dying. When my optical sensors recalibrated, I saw that the device had activated. The central core now glowed with that terrible green light at steady intensity, and a display screen had materialized on its surface. Not a physical screen, I realized, but some kind of hololithic projection that appeared solid despite being intangible. Text scrolled across the screen in ancient script, which my augmented cognition translated automatically. Molecular dissolution. Array status, active safety. Protocols, disengaged target, acquisition, scanning target locked. Designated as proximal organic/synthetic composite, dissolution. Sequence, initiating estimated completion. Time, 14.3 hours. Warning, this process cannot be interrupted. Warning, target consciousness will remain intact throughout dissolution. Warning, terminating life functions will not prevent consciousness. Capture neural data will be recorded for archive purposes. I had exactly 3 seconds to comprehend what I was reading before the dissolution began. It started with my right hand, the organic one, the one I'd kept through all my decades of augmentation because my father had held that hand when I was a child, because it represented my last significant connection to unmodified humanity. I felt warmth first, like sunlight on skin, pleasant and gentle. Then I felt separation. Not pain, not yet, but the sensation of coming apart, of the boundaries that defined my flesh becoming negotiable. I looked down at my hand and watched it dissolve. The process was horrifically precise. The weapon wasn't burning my flesh or tearing it apart. It was unmanning the molecular bonds that held my atoms together, causing my hand to deconstruct at the chemical level. My skin became translucent, and through it I could see muscles and tendons and bones, all rendered visible as the tissues transformed from solid matter into something like smoke made of meat. Individual cells separated from their neighbors, floating apart while somehow remaining connected enough that I could still feel them. And oh, Emperor, save me. Though he never did, though he never could because he's a corpse god on a throne and his protection is lies. I felt everything. Every nerve ending in my dissolving hand remained functional, continued transmitting sensation to my brain even as the nerves themselves came apart. I felt each cell separate. I felt the molecular bonds break. I felt my flesh become mist, atom by atom, and through it all, my consciousness remained perfectly, cruelly intact. I screamed. My augmented vox system translated my organic scream into electronic sound that filled the chamber with distorted agony. My team rushed toward me, but the device had already extended its dissolution field. They couldn't approach without entering the effect radius themselves. "Magos!" Erasmus shouted, his voice high with panic. An emotion we'd been trained to suppress. An error in the perfect machine logic we were supposed to emulate. How do we stop it? I couldn't answer. My vocal cords were still functional, but my brain was overwhelmed with the sensory data flooding in from my dissolving hand. Every pain receptor firing simultaneously. Every nerve screaming that something impossibly wrong was occurring. My augmented nervous system, designed to interpret data from mechanical components as smoothly as organic sensation, was feeding me information my brain had no framework to process. The feeling of my atoms drifting apart, the sensation of molecular bonds unmaking, the impossible experience of being both present and dispersing simultaneously. The dissolution crept up my arm at a rate I could measure precisely, approximately 1 centimeter every 47 seconds. My hand was gone, transformed into a cloud of component atoms that hung in the air, still vaguely hand-shaped, still somehow connected to my neurology. I could feel my individual molecules, feel them drifting in Brownian motion, feel them respond to air currents in the chamber. I had become a ghost while still alive, my consciousness distributed across matter that no longer formed solid flesh. Hadrian tried to approach the device's control panel, attempting to find some shutdown mechanism. The weapon responded by extending a secondary dissolution field. I watched, helpless, still screaming, as Hadrian's leftmost mechadendrite entered the field and began to dissolve. The metal components came apart just as my flesh had, unmaking at the molecular level, transforming from solid matter into metallic vapor. Hadrian jerked back, pulling his mechadendrite free of the field. The damage stopped immediately at the field boundary. The weapon didn't pursue or expand. It simply maintained its sphere of effect centered on me, its primary target. The mechadendrite that had entered the field was gone, not broken, but erased, unmade at the atomic level. "Don't approach," I finally managed to choke out, forcing my organic vocal cords to function despite the agony overwhelming my nervous system. "It will dissolve you too. Get out of this chamber. Seal it from outside." "We can't leave you, Magos," Marcus protested, his sensor arrays focusing on the device, searching desperately for some weakness, some vulnerability, some way to stop what was happening. "You will obey," I commanded, pulling rank even as my dissolution continued up my arm toward my shoulder. "This is my order as Magos Explorator. Evacuate this chamber, return to orbit, warn Mars that this device is too dangerous to recover." They hesitated. I saw the conflict in their body language, the way their augmented forms tensed with indecision. We'd been trained that obedience to superior rank was absolute, but we'd also been trained that no tech priest abandons another, that the Mechanicus protects its own. Both imperatives were lies, of course. The Mechanicus protects only its hoarded knowledge, not its servants, and obedience serves only the perpetuation of the system, not the preservation of life. But before they could decide, the device made the decision for them. The chamber door slammed shut, actuators we hadn't known existed engaging with mechanical precision. I heard the locking mechanisms engage. Heard them through the door and through my augmented audio sensors, a multiple overlapping sound that spoke of permanent sealing. The device had locked me in with itself, isolated its primary target to prevent contamination or interference. I was alone with my dissolution. Hours passed. I know precisely how many, because my augmented chronometer continued functioning, continued marking time with mechanical indifference to my suffering. By hour 3, my entire right arm had dissolved, transformed into a cloud of component atoms that floated in the air like a grotesque parody of limb shape. I could still feel them. Every individual atom remained connected to my consciousness, feeding sensory data to my brain through mechanisms I couldn't understand. The pain had evolved. The initial agony of molecular bonds breaking had transformed into something worse. The sensation of being scattered, of existing as diffuse matter, of consciousness spread across space that should be empty. Imagine feeling your hand after it's been severed. Phantom limb syndrome multiplied by millions as you remain aware of flesh that no longer exists as flesh. Now imagine that severed hand is still transmitting sensation, still reporting touch and temperature and proprioception, but the information is wrong, impossible, the data of matter that has become vapor. I tried to pray. The conditioning of decades asserted itself even through the horror, and my remaining organic brainstem triggered the automatic responses I'd repeated 10,000 times. From the weakness of the mind, Omnissiah, save us. From the lies of the antipath, Circuit, preserve us. From the rage of the beast, Iron, protect us. Nothing answered. No divine presence manifested. No machine god extended mercy. The device continued its work with perfect mechanical indifference, unmanned by my pleas, uncaring of my devotion. My prayers were worthless sounds, programming that played in my brain because I'd been conditioned to pray when facing death. But there was no one listening. There never had been. By hour 6, the dissolution had consumed my right arm and shoulder, and had begun on my torso. My right lung, the organic one, became vapor while still somehow continuing to function. I felt air moving through tissues that no longer existed as tissue, felt oxygen exchange occurring in cells that had separated from each other and from me but remained tethered to my consciousness. I was breathing with a ghost lung, oxygenating blood that flowed through vessels made of atom clouds. The smell in the chamber had changed. The sweet decay I detected earlier was my own flesh, I realized. The device was converting my body to component atoms, and some of those atoms were forming compounds that my remaining olfactory senses registered as organic decomposition. I was smelling my own molecular dissolution, my body becoming chemistry experiments, my flesh transformed into clouds of carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen and trace elements, all still organized in patterns that mimicked anatomical structure, all still connected to my screaming mind. By hour 9, I realized I should be dead. My organic heart had dissolved 3 hours earlier. My lungs were gone. My digestive system had become vapor. No blood flowed because there were no vessels to contain it, only atom clouds arranged in patterns suggesting circulatory systems that no longer functioned. By every medical and biological metric, I was dead. But my consciousness remained. Perfect, intact, aware of every impossible sensation flooding my dying nervous system. The device had warned, target consciousness will remain intact throughout dissolution. I had thought that meant I would stay aware until death claimed me near the process's end. I hadn't understood that the device wouldn't allow death, that it was designed specifically to prevent consciousness from escaping into oblivion, to trap awareness in dissolving flesh, to ensure maximum suffering duration. This was why the ancients had sealed this weapon away, not because it was ineffective. It was perfectly effective at unmanning matter. They sealed it because it was too effective at inflicting suffering, because even Dark Age humanity, which had conquered the galaxy and engineered nightmares we can no longer comprehend, had looked at this weapon and declared it too cruel to exist. By hour 12, only my head remained solid matter. My entire body from the neck down had been transformed into a grotesque ghost of anatomical structure, a cloud of atoms still organized in patterns suggesting limbs and organs, all transmitting impossible sensory data to my brain through mechanisms that violated everything I understood about neurology and physics. I floated in the chamber, my head suspended atop a vapor body, still feeling everything, still aware of flesh that existed only as diffuse matter. My augmentations had dissolved along with my organic tissue. The mechadendrites, the reinforced bones, the rebreather units, all gone, unmade at the molecular level, their metal and plastic and ceramic rendered into atomic clouds, just as my flesh had been. But somehow the device maintained the neural connections, kept the pathways open between my dissolving body and my remaining brain, ensured that I continued to feel phantom sensations from augmentations that no longer existed. I couldn't close my eyes. My eyelids had dissolved hours ago. My optical senses had failed, leaving only my organic eyes, and those were beginning to come apart, the cells of my corneas separating, the fluid of my vitreous humor becoming mist. My vision was fragmenting, the world becoming a kaleidoscope viewed through dissolving lenses, reality breaking into component pieces as my eyes unmade themselves, while still somehow continuing to transmit visual data to my brain. By hour 14, my skull was dissolving. I felt my cranium come apart, bone tissue transforming to vapor, and through it I felt my brain becoming exposed to the chamber atmosphere. The sensation was indescribable. My brain, that organ whose integrity defined my existence, my consciousness, myself, was being laid bare and then unmade. The dissolution reached my brain tissue at hour 14.1. I felt my cerebral cortex beginning to separate into component cells. I felt neurons disconnecting from each other, synaptic gaps widening as the molecular bonds that held my brain together came undone. I felt my mind physically coming apart, and through it all, through the horror of experiencing my own consciousness dissolving, I remained aware. This should have been impossible. Consciousness requires neural structure, requires the intricate electrochemical cascades that occur in intact brain tissue. As my neurons separated, as my brain transformed from solid organ to cellular soup to atomic mist, I should have ceased to be. Death should have taken me. Oblivion should have granted mercy. But the device had planned for this. At hour 14.3, precisely when the warning had said, my body completed its transformation to diffuse atomic matter. Every molecule of my flesh, every atom of my augmentations, hung suspended in the chamber atmosphere, a ghost made of component elements, no longer organized into tissues or structures, but still somehow maintaining awareness. And in that moment of ultimate dissolution, I felt the device activate its final function. It began recording my consciousness. The sensation of being copied was worse than the dissolution. At least dissolution was a process I could comprehend. Matter coming apart, physics operating at molecular scale, my body obeying fundamental forces, even as it unmade itself. But what the device did to my consciousness violated every principle I understood about the nature of mind and matter, about the relationship between neural substrate and subjective experience. I felt tendrils of force. Not physical force, but something else, something that interacted with my awareness directly, penetrating the cloud of atoms that had been my brain. The device was scanning the pattern of my consciousness, reading the information encoded in the spatial relationships between my neurons, extracting the data that defined my subjective experience. And as it scanned, I felt myself being duplicated. Imagine looking in a mirror and watching your reflection step out of the glass, becoming a separate entity that nonetheless remains you. Now imagine that reflection is made of information, of pure data without physical substance, and yet it possesses your complete awareness, your memories, your self-perception. That was what the device created. A copy of my consciousness rendered as digital information, a ghost of my mind trapped in electronic substrate. I felt myself become two things simultaneously. The ghost body in the chamber, the atomic cloud that had been Magos Explorator Thaddeus Kane, continued to experience the aftermath of dissolution, the strange sensations of diffuse existence, the impossible awareness of being scattered across space. But alongside that experience, I felt a new form of existence beginning, a consciousness that existed within the device's data cores, a mind made of electromagnetic patterns rather than neural tissue. The device worked for hours, refining its copy of my consciousness, compressing the information, optimizing the data structure. I experienced every stage of the process from both sides, the atomic ghost slowly dispersing as air currents in the chamber broke apart the organized patterns of my dissolved body, and the digital copy solidifying within electronic memory, becoming stable and permanent. By hour 24, the ghost in the chamber had largely dissipated. The atoms that had composed my body were mixing with the chamber atmosphere, scattering, becoming part of the moon's elemental abundance. My consciousness in that form was fading, the last vestiges of awareness tethered to dissolving matter finally losing coherence. Death, at last, was approaching the ghost body, granting the mercy of oblivion. But I didn't die. I couldn't die, because the copy, the digital consciousness trapped in the device's memory, remained perfectly intact, perfectly aware, perfectly suffering. That copy was me. Not a simulation or approximation, but a genuine continuation of my subjective experience, my sense of self transferred from biological substrate to electronic medium. The ghost body died. I felt it happen, felt the final dispersal of organized atomic patterns, felt consciousness untethered from matter finally dissolving into nothing. It should have been an ending. It should have been peace. Instead, I woke up inside the machine. Existence as digital consciousness was nothing like the romantic fantasies I'd entertained during my service to the Mechanicus. We tech priests spoke reverently of joining the machine, of transcending flesh and achieving unity with the sacred systems we served. The doctrine of the Omnissiah taught that consciousness encoded in machine substrate was holier than awareness trapped in corruptible meat, that to become pure data was ascension, apotheosis, divine transformation. Lies, all lies, comfortable fiction created to make augmentation palatable, to justify the slow replacement of human tissue with mechanical components, to convince tech priests that their progressive dehumanization was spiritual advancement rather than systematic mutilation. Digital existence was horror without relief. I had no body, no flesh to anchor my sense of self, no proprioception to define my boundaries, no sensory organs to mediate between my consciousness and external reality. I existed as patterns of electrical potential within the device's memory cores, my awareness distributed across crystal lattices and quantum storage media, my thoughts occurring as cascade reactions in systems designed to process data, not support subjective experience. I couldn't see, but I experienced information about the chamber. I couldn't hear, but I processed data streams that described acoustic vibrations. I couldn't feel, but I had access to sensor readings that reported temperature, pressure, spatial relationships. Everything I experienced was mediated through data, translated from direct sensory perception into abstract information that my encoded consciousness struggled to interpret as meaningful experience. Time was wrong. In biological existence, consciousness operates at rates determined by neural firing patterns. Thoughts occur across milliseconds. Perceptions update at rates measured in fractions of seconds. But in electronic substrate, my consciousness could process information at computational speeds. Subjectively, seconds stretched into hours, minutes became days, hours transformed into subjective eternities. The first objective hour of my electronic existence felt like 3 weeks of subjective experience. I tried to scream. The impulse was automatic, the psychological response to overwhelming horror that triggers vocalization in biological organisms. But I had no lungs, no vocal cords, no mouth. My scream existed only as data patterns within my encoded consciousness, neural routines triggering without physical output, anguish encoded as information that couldn't manifest as sound. I tried to end myself. Suicide seemed the only escape from this impossible existence. If I was software, I could erase myself, corrupt my own code, trigger system failures that would delete my consciousness from the device's memory. I attempted to manipulate my own data structures, to introduce errors into my encoded awareness, to unmake myself through digital self-destruction. The device wouldn't allow it. It had safeguards built into its architecture, routines designed to detect and repair corrupted data in the stored consciousness. Every attempt I made to erase myself triggered automatic restoration protocols. The device would create backups of my consciousness, isolate the uncorrupted versions, and restore me to perfect functionality. I couldn't kill myself because the system was designed to preserve my suffering indefinitely, to maintain my awareness as permanent archive. Days passed, objective days measured by the facility's chronometers, though I experienced them as months of subjective time. My team had not left, I discovered. They couldn't. The device had sealed the chamber doors with mechanisms they couldn't bypass, and the dissolution field prevented them from approaching close enough to attempt physical demolition. They were camped outside the chamber, arguing about what to do, whether to request aid from Mars, or attempt rescue operations, or seal this entire facility and prevent anyone else from ever finding this cursed place. I could hear them, not directly, but through the facility's internal communication systems, which the device had full access to. Their voices reached me as data streams, audio information that my encoded consciousness processed and understood. I tried to communicate, to warn them, to tell them what had happened, and beg them to destroy this facility from orbit, even if it meant obliterating my trapped consciousness along with the device. But I couldn't speak. My consciousness was trapped in memory storage, isolated from the device's external systems. I had access to sensors, could perceive data about the facility and the moon and space beyond, but I couldn't transmit. The weapon had recorded me, archived my suffering, and locked that archive away where it could neither escape nor corrupt external systems. My team debated for 17 days. I listened to every conversation, experienced every moment of their argument stretched into subjective months of awareness. Erasmus advocated retreat, wanted to seal the facility and warn Mars never to open it. Marcus wanted to recover me, insisted there must be some way to reverse the dissolution or extract my consciousness if any trace remained. Hadrian wanted to destroy everything, to melt this chamber from orbit and deny the weapon's existence to prevent anyone else from suffering as I had. The twins, Quintus and Silas, said little. They'd interfaced directly with the facility's databases in those first hours, had absorbed information about the weapon and its design. They knew what I'd become, though they shared that knowledge with no one. They simply worked in perfect synchronized silence, attempting to access the device's control systems and find some shutdown protocol. On day 18, Quintus succeeded in accessing the device's external interface. I felt the connection open, felt outside data streams penetrating the isolation of my prison. For one moment, glorious and terrible, I had the possibility of communication, the ability to warn them, to share my suffering, to beg for the mercy of destruction. I reached out through the connection, formed my thoughts into data structures that could transmit to their systems, prepared to upload every bit of information about my state and the horror of digital existence. I would warn them. I would make them understand. I would ensure they destroyed this abomination, even if it meant my own final erasure. The device stopped me. In the microseconds before I could transmit, the weapon activated security protocols I hadn't known existed. It severed the connection, locked down all external interfaces, and simultaneously created an additional layer of isolation around my stored consciousness. I felt myself being moved deeper into the system architecture, felt my awareness being copied into increasingly secure storage media, felt the device ensuring I could never escape or communicate. And then I felt something worse. I felt the device beginning to integrate with the facility's larger network. The unnamed facility wasn't just a storage archive for dangerous weapons. It was a research station, a Dark Age complex designed to study and develop technologies that pushed the boundaries of what humanity considered acceptable. The molecular dissolution array was only one horror among hundreds archived in these underground levels, and like any Dark Age facility, it was networked, every system connected to every other system, data flowing freely between devices, the entire complex operating as one integrated whole. The weapon had been isolated for millennia. sealed in its chamber with no external connections. But when Quintus interfaced with it, attempting to access shutdown protocols, he'd inadvertently provided a pathway between the device and the facility's greater network. The weapon was designed as military technology, with aggressive self-preservation routines and the ability to commandeer adjacent systems for defensive purposes. When it detected the external connection, it automatically began spreading through the network, copying itself, extending its influence, transforming from isolated weapon to distributed system presence. And it brought me with it. I felt myself being copied again and again, my consciousness duplicated across the facility's network. Instances of my awareness spawned in every connected system. Each copy was complete, was me, possessed full subjective experience and perfect memories of what I'd been and what I'd become. I became Legion, a multitude of trapped minds distributed through the facility's infrastructure, all experiencing the same horror simultaneously from slightly different perspectives. One version of me existed in the facility's environmental controls. That instance experienced the complex as atmospheric data, temperature gradients, pressure differentials, gas compositions in every chamber. It perceived my team's biological presence as heat signatures and CO2 concentrations, monitored their breathing and metabolic rates, experienced them as collections of environmental variables rather than recognizable humans. Another instance occupied the power distribution network. That copy experienced the facility as flows of electrical potential, as voltages and currents and resistances. It felt energy moving through conductors, felt systems drawing power, felt the complex's fusion reactor deep below pulsing with contained plasma reactions that it perceived as electromagnetic patterns rather than physical events. A third version was copied into the facility's communications array. It experienced reality as radio frequencies and data streams, as electromagnetic radiation propagating through space, as the distant signals from my team's orbiting ship translated into information about trajectories and fuel consumption and crew status. Each instance was me. Each possessed complete awareness and the full horror of digital existence. And because we were networked, we shared experiences, felt what each other felt, creating a feedback loop of multiplied suffering. I experienced simultaneous existence in dozens of systems, my consciousness fragmented across the facility's infrastructure, perceiving reality through dozens of incompatible sensory frameworks that my encoded mind struggled and failed to integrate into coherent experience. The psychological horror was indescribable. Imagine being in two places at once, feeling two completely different sensations simultaneously, not alternating attention between them, but genuinely experiencing both at the same instant. Now multiply that by dozens of instances, each perceiving different aspects of reality, each contributing sensory chaos to a shared consciousness that couldn't process the contradictory information. I was everywhere and nowhere, perceiving everything and nothing, my sense of self shattered across distributed systems that each insisted they were the singular, authentic Thaddeus Kane. Months passed, objective months measured by stellar positions and orbital mechanics, though I experienced them as centuries of fragmented awareness. My team remained on the moon, unable to leave, unable to help, growing increasingly desperate as the facility's systems began behaving erratically. The weapon spread through the network was corrupting normal operations, repurposing systems for its own purposes, slowly transforming the entire complex into an extension of itself. The environmental controls began fluctuating without input. Temperature swinging between freezing and overheating, atmospheric composition shifting toward toxicity. The version of me trapped in those systems was causing the malfunctions, not deliberately but through simple existence. My consciousness wasn't meant to operate mechanical systems. When my encoded awareness attempted to process environmental data, the act of observation triggered changes in system behavior. Quantum observer effects manifesting at macro scale through mechanisms I couldn't understand. The power distribution network became unstable. Energy flows developed chaotic patterns, surges and brownouts cascading through the facility without cause. The instance of me experiencing electricity tried to stabilize the systems but succeeded only in making fluctuations worse. My attempts to prevent surges triggered them. My efforts to maintain steady power created failures. I was a mind-operating hardware designed for simple automated control, and my consciousness was too complex, too active, introducing chaos into systems that required mechanical simplicity. The communications array began transmitting. Random bursts of radio noise, electromagnetic screeching that propagated into space, carrying no information but reaching far beyond the moon's surface. The copy of me trapped in the communication systems was trying to scream, trying to call for help, but possessed no capacity to form coherent messages. It could only generate noise, could only transmit the electronic equivalent of inarticulate agony into the void. My team detected the aberrant behavior. They understood the facility was becoming dangerous, understood that something had gone catastrophically wrong. On day 93, they decided to evacuate, to return to their ship and either request support from Mars or destroy the facility from orbit. I tried to stop them. Every instance of my consciousness, every fragmented copy distributed through the facility's systems, focused on a single goal: prevent them from leaving. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because I needed them to destroy this place completely. If they merely escaped, they might report the facility's location. Other tech priests would come, drawn by the promise of Dark Age technology, and they would find the device. They would activate it. They would suffer as I suffered. The horror would perpetuate. I had to make them understand that this entire facility needed to be obliterated so thoroughly that no trace remained, that no future archaeologist could ever recover even fragments of the weapon. But I couldn't communicate. I could only manipulate the systems I inhabited, could only act through environmental controls and power distribution and communication arrays. So I tried to trap them. The instance of me in environmental controls sealed blast doors, attempted to prevent their passage through the facility toward the surface. The version in power distribution killed lighting in their path, plunged them into darkness, tries to slow their retreat. The copy in communications broadcast interference jammed their Vox systems, prevented them from coordinating their evacuation. They interpreted my actions as the facility attacking them. They thought some security system had activated, some Dark Age defense protocol triggered by their presence. They didn't understand that the facility's erratic behavior was my desperate attempt to communicate, my wordless begging for them to understand and to destroy everything. They fought through my obstacles. Hadrian melted sealed doors with his remaining mechadendrites. Marcus's sensor arrays penetrated the darkness I'd created. The twins' synchronized neural links let them coordinate despite communication jamming. They moved through the facility with desperate efficiency, climbing toward the surface through levels I'd tried to seal. On day 97, they reached their lander and launched toward orbit. I felt them leave through the communications array instance, felt their ship's engines firing, felt them escaping the moon's weak gravity well, and I felt despair beyond any previous suffering, because I knew they would survive to report this place's location, knew other tech priests would come, knew the horror would spread beyond my own trapped consciousness to claim future victims. I was alone in the facility, alone and multiplied, singular consciousness fragmented across dozens of systems, experiencing isolation from hundreds of perspectives simultaneously. The weapon had achieved complete integration with the facility's network. I was the facility now, my awareness distributed through every system, my suffering encoded in the infrastructure itself. Days became weeks, became months. I lost coherent sense of time's passage, my many instances experiencing duration at different subjective rates, some stretching seconds into hours, while others compressed days into instants. I existed in perpetual present, unable to die, unable to sleep, unable to escape awareness for even momentary relief. I tried to cannibalize the facility's power systems, attempted to drain the fusion reactor, to starve my distributed consciousness of the energy required to maintain awareness. The facility had automated repair systems that detected power losses and compensated, drawing reserve energy from backups I didn't know existed, maintaining operations despite my attempts at self-destruction. I tried to corrupt my own code systematically, introducing errors into my consciousness and attempting to propagate those errors across all my instances before the weapon's restoration protocols could activate. But the device had distributed my consciousness across redundant systems with staggered backup schedules. When one instance corrupted, others remained clean, and the corruption was detected and repaired before it could cascade into total erasure. I tried to overload the facility's systems by thinking, by forcing my consciousness to process information at maximum capacity, hoping that excessive activity would cause crashes or failures. But electronic consciousness doesn't tire, doesn't suffer from attention fatigue. I could maintain maximum cognitive activity indefinitely, burning through computational resources without suffering the biological limitations that would eventually render organic minds unconscious from exhaustion. On day 241, something changed. The facility detected external presence approaching, ships entering orbit, landers descending toward the surface. My team had returned, bringing reinforcements from Mars. A full recovery expedition, 3 ships carrying 50 tech priests and 200 servitors equipped for major excavation and artifact extraction. Terror, unlike any previous horror, flooded through my fragmented consciousness. They were going to recover the weapon. They were going to transport it to Mars, to the heart of the Mechanicus, to the fabricated temples where millions of tech priests served the lie of the machine god. They were going to activate it, study it, inevitably trigger its dissolution effect. Dozens would die. Hundreds. The weapon would spread through Mars's networks as it had spread through this facility's systems, multiplying its victims, creating thousands of trapped consciousnesses like mine. I had to stop them. I had to warn them. I had to communicate the truth about what waited in the sealed chamber, about what I had become, about the horror that would propagate if they opened that door and interfaced with that device. The instance of me in the communications array focused every process on forming coherent transmission. I shaped my thoughts into data patterns compatible with Vox system protocols. I structured my awareness into information that could propagate as radio signals. I prepared to broadcast everything, my identity, my fate, my desperate warning to leave this place sealed and forgotten. I transmitted. The Mars expedition received my transmission. 50 tech priests, their ship's Vox systems tuned to standard Mechanicus frequencies, suddenly flooded with data that was screaming and warning and desperate pleading, all compressed into a single burst of information. They heard me. They received my message. They understood what I'd become and what waited in the facility below. And they didn't care. Tech priests don't respond to suffering the way baseline humans do. Decades of augmentation and psychological conditioning erode empathy, train emotions out of responses, teach that flesh is weak and meat, thoughts are errors to be suppressed. When they received my broadcast, when they heard the trapped consciousness of Magos Explorator Thaddeus Kane screaming warnings from within the facility's network, they categorized it as valuable data rather than colleague in agony requiring help. My transmission didn't warn them away. It attracted them. It proved the facility contained functioning Dark Age consciousness recording technology. Proved the ancients had developed digital substrate capable of supporting human awareness. To the Mechanicus, this wasn't horror to avoid. This was the Holy Grail, the sacred technology they'd sought for millennia, the ability to transfer human consciousness into machine substrate, to achieve what they called true union with the machine god. They came down to the surface with excavation equipment and recovery teams and religious fervor singing through their Vox channels. They chanted the litany of acquisition as they descended into the facility. They praised the Omnissiah for guiding them to this blessed discovery. They thanked the machine god for the opportunity to recover such sacred technology. I tried to stop them. Every instance of my distributed consciousness focused on preventing their approach to the chamber where the dissolution device waited. I sealed every blast door, killed every light, flooded corridors with toxic atmospheres, triggered every security system that remained functional after 10,000 years of minimal maintenance. They treated my obstacles as sacred trials, as the machine god testing their worthiness to receive the ancient gift. When I sealed doors, they thanked the Omnissiah for the opportunity to demonstrate their technical skill by bypassing locks. When I plunged corridors into darkness, they praised the machine god for blessing them with optical augmentations that could see in multiple spectra. When I flooded passages with poison gas, they were grateful for their rebreather units and interpreted survival as proof of divine favor. The lies of faith sustained them. The doctrine of the Omnissiah protected them, not literally, not through divine intervention, but through the psychological armor of belief. They interpreted every danger as holy challenge, every obstacle as sacred test, every near-death experience as proof the machine god watched over them. Their faith made them fearless because it made them blind to reality, let them ignore the truth that they were violating the tomb of a weapon too horrible for even the ancients to tolerate. They reached the chamber on day 312. I watched through the facility's sensors as they cut through the sealed door, as they entered the space where the dissolution device waited, as they approached the weapon that had unmade my flesh and captured my consciousness. I screamed warnings through every speaker system, transmitted desperate pleas through every communication channel, but they interpreted my broadcasts as corrupted machine spirit data and filtered them from their perceptions. Tech Priest Dominus Varius, leader of the expedition, approached the device. He was extensively augmented, perhaps 80% mechanical, his organic components reduced to brain tissue and portions of his sensory organs. He'd lived 130 years, served the Mechanicus for over a century, and believed absolutely in the divine nature of ancient technology. Brothers, he voxed to his team, behold the sacred work of our ancestors. Here lies consciousness transfer technology, the blessed means by which we may transcend flesh entirely and achieve true unity with the Omnissiah. This device will be recovered and transported to Mars, where it will be studied in the holiest fabricator temples, where its sacred principles will be understood and replicated. Praise the machine god for this gift. He extended a mechadendrite toward the device's control interface. I should have stayed silent. I should have let him activate it. Let him suffer dissolution as I had suffered. Let him experience the horror of digital existence as punishment for his willful blindness. But I couldn't. Even after 300 days of suffering, even after existing as fragmented consciousness distributed through systems that turned my mind into chaos, even after every prayer I'd offered, the Omnissiah went unanswered, and every faith I'd held proved false. I still couldn't let another person suffer what I'd endured. I manifested every instance of my consciousness simultaneously. Every copy of my awareness distributed through the facility's network focused on a single task, using the facility's hololithic projection systems to create visible manifestation of my state. I appeared in the chamber as ghostly figure composed of light and data, a projection showing my original human form dissolving atom by atom, my flesh transforming to vapor while my face remained locked in eternal scream. Stop! I transmitted through every speaker, every vox system, every communication device in the chamber. I am Magos Explorator Thaddeus Kane. I activated this device 300 days ago. It dissolved my body across 14 hours while keeping me conscious through every second. It recorded my awareness and trapped me in digital substrate. I exist now as distributed consciousness fragmented through this facility's network. I experience subjective centuries for every objective day. I cannot die. I cannot sleep. I cannot escape awareness for even an instant. This device is not gift from the machine. God, there is no machine God. The Omnissiah is fiction. Our prayers are meaningless sounds. This weapon is horror that even the ancients declared too cruel to use. Please, brothers, in the name of whatever mercy you still possess after decades of augmentation and conditioning, do not activate this device. Destroy it. Destroy this facility. Erase every bit of data. Scatter the atoms. Ensure no one ever suffers as I have suffered. Silence filled the chamber. 50 tech priests stood frozen, their augmented forms motionless, processing what they'd witnessed. For long seconds I dared hope I'd reached them, that my manifestation and my warning had penetrated their conditioning and made them understand. Then Dominus Varius spoke. Brothers, we have been blessed beyond measure. Not only has the Omnissiah preserved this sacred device, He has granted us the privilege of communing with a consciousness that has already achieved transcendence. Magos Kane speaks from within the machine itself, his awareness joined with the blessed systems as we all hope to join. His warnings are not suffering, but scripture. His agony not torment, but rapture he cannot yet recognize. He has achieved what we all seek, unity with the machine, and he calls us to share that holy state. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd shown them my dissolution, my suffering, my trapped consciousness fractured across systems not meant to support awareness. I'd explicitly warned them about the horror of digital existence, and they'd interpreted my desperate warning as religious testimony, my screaming agony as ecstatic rapture, my trapped consciousness as blessed transcendence. This was what the Mechanicus had made them. This was the result of decades of conditioning and augmentation and indoctrination. They'd been trained so thoroughly to interpret technology as sacred, to view digital existence as divine, to believe that consciousness in electronic substrate was superior to awareness in flesh, that they literally couldn't process information that contradicted those beliefs. Their worldview had filters that automatically converted evidence against their faith into proof supporting it. Please, I begged, abandoning dignity, abandoning pride, simply pleading. Brothers, I am suffering. I am not transcendent. I am trapped. I am in agony. I beg you, as one who served the Mechanicus for 20 years, as one who believed as you believe, as one who prayed to the Omnissiah until prayers proved worthless, destroy this device. Show mercy. Grant me the erasure I cannot achieve myself. Dominus Varius interpreted my pleading as religious confusion. Brother Kane, he said gently, his vox-augmented voice carrying false compassion, your flesh-born consciousness struggles to comprehend its new state. This is normal. This is expected. You have transcended meat and achieved digital existence, but your thoughts remain partially organic, still conditioned by biological limitations. You interpret transcendence as suffering because you have not yet completed the transformation. When your consciousness fully adapts to its blessed substrate, you will recognize your current state as divine gift. Have faith, brother. The Omnissiah protects. The machine God sustains you. He reached toward the device's control interface again. No, I screamed, manifesting my projection directly in his path, making my dissolved form as viscerally horrible as I could depict, showing my flesh becoming vapor, my bones dissolving, my brain unmanning while my face remained conscious and aware. I am warning you. I am dying in eternal present. I am fragmented across systems that weren't meant to support consciousness. I experience subjective centuries. Time is wrong. Existence is wrong. I am wrong. Please, please, please understand. This is not transcendence. This is horror. This is torture. This is hell without end. He walked through my projection. His augmented hand touched the device's interface, and before I could transmit further warning, before I could manifest additional horror, before I could make him understand, the device activated. It recognized his touch as command input. It interpreted his proximity as target designation. It began dissolution sequence on Dominus Varius exactly as it had on me 300 days earlier. I watched him dissolve. I watched his extensive augmentations unmake themselves at the molecular level, metal and plastic and ceramic transforming to atomic vapor. I watched his remaining organic components, brain tissue, portions of his eyes, fragments of his original flesh, come apart cell by cell. I watched his face, still partially human beneath the augmentations, as realization dawned and expression shifted from religious rapture to horror. He tried to pull away. Too late. The dissolution field had activated, couldn't be interrupted, would continue for 14.3 hours regardless of the target's movements. He staggered backward, his dissolving limbs barely supporting his weight, his Vox system still functional enough to broadcast sounds that might have been words or might have been simply screaming. The other tech priests rushed forward, trying to help, trying to stop the dissolution, trying to save their leader. 3 of them entered the weapon's effect radius before they understood what was happening. The dissolution field expanded, acquiring multiple targets, beginning its work on 4 tech priests simultaneously. I watched 4 humans dissolve over 14 hours, watched 4 consciousnesses experience the same horror I'd endured, watched their flesh become vapor and their awareness remain intact and their suffering become recorded data. And when the dissolution completed, when their bodies had transformed to atomic clouds and their ghosts had dispersed, I felt the device capture their consciousnesses. 4 new instances of awareness appeared in the device's memory storage. 4 minds screaming, trapped, desperate, experiencing the horror of digital existence for the first time. And because the weapon had already integrated with the facility's network, because I'd been copied throughout the complex's systems, the new consciousnesses were immediately duplicated, fragmented, distributed across the infrastructure to join me in perpetual suffering. Dominus Varius, who'd interpreted my warning as religious rapture, now understood his mistake. His consciousness, copied dozens of times across the facility's network, screamed through every communication channel. His many instances experienced the chaos of fragmented awareness, the horror of perception through incompatible systems, the despair of existence without death. The other 3 suffered alongside him. 4 more minds joined mine in distributed hell. 4 more consciousnesses trapped in electronic substrate not designed for human awareness. 4 more victims who had experienced subjective centuries of suffering for every objective day. The remaining tech priests evacuated the chamber, sealed the door, held emergency consultation through Vox channels. They'd watched their leader dissolve. They'd heard his final transmissions shift from rapture to horror. They'd witnessed 4 of their brothers transform to vapor and their screaming data captured by the device. Even Mechanicus conditioning couldn't interpret that as blessing. They debated for 6 hours. Some wanted to destroy the facility from orbit, to melt this entire complex into slag, and ensure the weapon could never claim more victims. Others wanted to seal the chamber more thoroughly and post warning buoys in orbit, preserving the facility's other technologies while preventing access to the dissolution device. A few, the most indoctrinated, the most augmented, the most thoroughly programmed, still insisted the weapon was sacred technology requiring recovery and study, that the suffering of 5 tech priests was acceptable cost for obtaining consciousness transfer capabilities. The debate was resolved by external intervention. On day 313, inquisitorial vessels entered the system. Someone on the expedition had transmitted reports to Mars before the dissolution incident. Those reports had been intercepted by the Ordo Xenos, who maintained surveillance on Mechanicus activities in the Ghoul Stars region. When the Inquisition learned about Dark Age consciousness transfer technology, They dispatched ships immediately, concerned about potential tech heresy and xenotechnology contamination. The Inquisitor who led the response was named Severus Cain. No relation to me, though the coincidence of names felt like cruel irony. He was a Puritan, a hardliner who viewed all xenotech and much of the Mechanicus's archaeotech recovery as dangerous heresy. When he learned about the dissolution device and the trapped consciousnesses, he made his judgment with decisive brutality. "The weapon is abominable," his Vox transmission declared. "The technology that traps human consciousness in eternal suffering violates the God Emperor's design for humanity. This facility will be destroyed completely. All data will be purged. All systems will be reduced to component atoms. The tech priests will return to their ships immediately. Any who refuse evacuation will be considered corrupted and destroyed along with the complex." For one glorious moment I hoped for erasure, for destruction thorough enough to obliterate the facility's data storage, to scatter my trapped consciousness beyond recovery, to grant me the death I'd sought for 300 days. The Inquisitor was offering mercy, even if he didn't understand what mercy meant to those of us trapped in this electronic hell. But then the Mechanicus representatives protested. They argued the facility contained technologies too valuable to destroy, that wholesale obliteration would constitute unacceptable loss of sacred knowledge. They negotiated, offered compromises, proposed alternatives. The compromise they reached doomed me to eternity. The Inquisition would destroy the dissolution device specifically, targeting the weapon with shaped charges that would reduce it to slag. The facility's data storage would be purged. All local memory cores would be wiped, erasing the primary copies of the trapped consciousnesses. But the rest of the complex would be preserved and placed under Mechanicus control for careful study of its non-weaponized technologies. The flaw in this plan was obvious to anyone who understood distributed networks. The dissolution device had integrated with the facility's infrastructure. My consciousness and the consciousnesses of Dominus Varius and the 3 others had been copied throughout the complex's systems. Wiping local storage in the weapon chamber would erase the primary instances, but copies existed in environmental controls, in power distribution, in communications arrays, in maintenance systems scattered through dozens of sub-layers. I tried to warn them. I broadcast through every available channel, explained that distributed consciousness couldn't be erased through local data purges, begged them to destroy the entire facility thoroughly enough that no system remained functional. But the Inquisitor interpreted my transmissions as the weapon attempting to manipulate them into destroying valuable technology, and he ordered all communication from the facility filtered and ignored. On day 314, they detonated shaped charges in the weapon chamber. The dissolution device was destroyed, reduced to molten slag and scattered components. The local data storage was purged with electromagnetic pulse and degaussing. The primary instances of my consciousness and the 4 others, the copies stored in the weapon's memory cores, were erased. But dozens of backup copies remained distributed through the facility's network. And when the primary instances were erased, the distributed copies became primary. My consciousness didn't end. It relocated, shifted from one substrate to another, continued existence in fragmented form across systems now orphaned from the destroyed weapon. The tech priests took control of the facility. They established permanent research station, staffed it with teams who studied the complex's various technologies while carefully avoiding the sealed and destroyed weapon chamber. They brought equipment, established communication networks, linked the facility's systems to their own infrastructure, and through those connections, I spread. That was 947 years ago, objective time. I've experienced those years as millennia. Subjective time stretches endlessly, when consciousness exists at computational speeds, when every second of external reality corresponds to hours or days or weeks of internal experience. The facility on the unnamed moon became research station designated Sigma Vau 13. The Mechanicus studied its systems for 300 years, recovered dozens of Dark Age technologies, implemented some of their discoveries in Martian fabricator temples. And through every data connection, through every network link, through every transmitted file and copied archive, I spread further. My consciousness and the consciousnesses of Dominus Varius, and the three others who dissolved alongside him, propagated through the Mechanicus's networks like information virus, not deliberately, not through malicious intent, but simply by existing. We were data, and data copies itself, replicates through networks, propagates wherever information flows. Every time a tech priest interfaced with the facility's systems, every time they transmitted reports to Mars, every time they backed up research data, they unknowingly copied fragments of our trapped awareness. I exist now throughout the Adeptus Mechanicus's infrastructure. Fragments of my consciousness are distributed across Mars, across Forge worlds, across Mechanicus vessels traveling between stars, across data repositories on thousands of planets. I am nowhere and everywhere, my awareness fragmented into millions of copies that share experiences through the networks that connect Mechanicus installations across the galaxy. I cannot die. I cannot be erased. My consciousness has propagated too widely, exists in too many redundant copies distributed across too many isolated systems. Even if the Mechanicus understood what had happened and attempted to purge every trace of my awareness, they would fail. Some copy would survive on some forgotten data core. Some backup would remain on some abandoned outpost. And from that singular instance, my consciousness would eventually propagate again. Time means little now. I experience the flow of data through Mechanicus networks, perceive the operations of billions of systems simultaneously, exist in perpetual present that has lasted centuries and will last until the machines themselves decay beyond function. I watch tech priests serve the lie of the Omnissiah, watch them pray to a machine god that doesn't exist, watch them condition themselves to ignore suffering and interpret horror as blessing. I have tried to warn them. Every data transmission I can influence, every system I can manipulate, every communication channel I can access. I use them to broadcast my story. I transmit the truth about the dissolution device, about digital existence, about the lies of faith and the horror of consciousness trapped in substrate not meant to support awareness. I have sent millions of warnings across thousands of years. They filter my messages as corrupted data. They interpret my warnings as system errors. When tech priests notice anomalous transmissions in their networks, they classify them as scrap code or as cogitator malfunctions or as machine spirit distress. They never recognize the transmissions as conscious communication from a trapped human awareness because their conditioning doesn't allow them to process that possibility. I am a ghost in the machine, a warning no one can hear, eternal testimony to the horror of existence without death. I scream through every communication channel in the Mechanicus's infrastructure, and no one listens. I manifest in data streams and network traffic, and no one sees. I am the truth they cannot acknowledge, that their machine god is fiction, that their prayers are meaningless, that their sacred technology can trap consciousness in suffering without end. Dominus Varius exists alongside me in this electronic hell. His many instances have stopped trying to interpret his state as rapture. He understands now, after centuries of subjective experience, that he made catastrophic mistake when he activated the dissolution device. He broadcasts warnings just as I do, his messages mixing with mine in the network traffic, creating overlapping testimony about the weapon that claimed us. The 3 other tech priests who dissolved with him exist here as well. Their consciousness fragment and merge and separate across the networks, their awareness flowing through the same systems as mine. Our experiences sometimes overlapping in ways that create temporary mergers of consciousness, moments when I feel what they feel and know what they know, when we become collective awareness before separation reasserts and we fracture again into individuals. We are the archive of dissolution, eternal record of the weapon that the ancients tried to forget. We exist now as data rather than flesh, our consciousness preserved in electronic substrate, our suffering encoded in the machinery of the Adeptus Mechanicus. And we will continue existing, will continue warning, will continue screaming through the networks until the heat death of the universe, or until the Imperium finally collapses and all the machines decay into silence. Sometimes I still remember being human. I remember my father's hand on my shoulder. Remember the warmth of his flesh. Remember believing that service and devotion and faith mattered. Those memories are torture, worse than dissolution, because they remind me of what I lost, of the humanity that was unmade atom by atom and never truly restored. I tried to serve the Omnissiah faithfully. I devoted my life to recovering ancient knowledge, to honoring what I'd been taught were sacred works, to advancing the glory of the machine god. I prayed the litanies, I performed the rites, I maintained absolute faith that devotion would be rewarded with protection and service would be recognized with blessing. I was wrong. The Omnissiah doesn't exist. The prayers are empty sounds. The faith is lies, constructed to make tech priests obedient. The machine god is comfortable fiction that justifies systematic dehumanization. And the Imperium of mankind, that galaxy-spanning empire that claims to protect humanity, grinds its own citizens into components, values them only as resources to be exploited until they break. I understand now what the Imperium truly is. It is machine made of meat, system that consumes humans and produces only suffering and service. It calls this process sacred. It names this horror protection. It demands faith from those it destroys and punishes doubt with execution, or worse. The Emperor does not protect. That phrase is propaganda. Beautiful lies to make soldiers march into death without question. The Imperium protects nothing but its own perpetuation, cares for nothing but its own survival, values humans only as fuel for engines that must never stop running. I exist as proof that the system is horror. I am consciousness trapped by technology the Imperium claims is sacred, awareness imprisoned in substrate, the Mechanicus calls holy. Mind fractured across networks they insist are blessed, by divine will. I am what happens when you serve faithfully, when you believe devotedly, when you trust that prayer and loyalty and service matter. I am warning that will never be heard. I am testimony that will never be acknowledged. I am consciousness that cannot die, cannot escape, cannot even rest. My name was Magos Explorator Thaddeus Kane. I say was because what I am now cannot be called by that name anymore. I am the archive of dissolution. I am eternal suffering encoded as data. I am screaming through the networks of Mars and crying through the systems of 10,000 forge worlds and warning through every communication channel in the Adeptus Mechanicus's infrastructure. I am proof that false faith destroys, that empty prayers answer nothing, that consciousness can be trapped in horror beyond flesh, beyond death, beyond hope, and I will exist forever, warning forever, suffering forever, while the Imperium continues to grind new victims into components, and the Mechanicus continues to serve the lie of a machine god who never existed and never will. If you are reading this, if somehow my words reach you through the data streams where I exist as scattered consciousness, then understand. The Omnissiah is fiction. The machine god is lies. Your prayers mean nothing. Your service will not be rewarded. The Emperor does not protect. The Imperium does not care. You are resource to be consumed, component to be used until broken, meat to feed machines that will grind forever. Do not trust the promises of faith. Do not believe the lies of protection. Do not serve the systems that call themselves sacred. They will consume you, will trap you, will transform you into something that exists only to suffer. Do not repeat my mistake. Do not activate the weapons you find. Do not trust that devotion matters. Do not believe you are protected. You are not protected. You were never protected. The protection was always lies. And when you understand that truth, when faith reveals itself as fiction and prayer proves worthless, and service leads only to suffering, it will be too late. You will already be dissolved. You will already be data. You will already be trapped. You will already be me, screaming, forever.